Skyrim has a quiet way of filling its world with tiny, almost unnoticeable details. Little things you pass by 1,000 times without realizing they were ever there, and each of these small curiosities quietly shapes the game's atmosphere like grains of snow drifting against a window in the early morning. Somewhere just outside Whiterun, beneath the shade of a tree leaning slightly toward the path, there's a single wooden bucket sitting upside down for no apparent reason, never explained, never moved by NPCs, simply existing as though someone long ago set it down and forgot it. In the forest near Falkreath, the birds occasionally perch on branches at angles that seem too deliberate, as though they were posed by an artist rather than placed by random generation, making the wilderness feel like a painting that occasionally shifts its composition when no one is looking. The watermill in Riverwood has a small notch carved into the side of its wheel texture, a tiny imperfection that repeats endlessly as the wheel turns, giving the impression of a craftsman who carved it by hand with a tool that slipped once, leaving a mark preserved forever in the game's quiet rhythms. Sometimes, when you visit the Bannered Mare late at night, the inn's lanterns produce faint shifts of color along the wooden floorboards, a subtle effect caused by overlapping light variations that almost makes the old tavern feel alive, like the building has a pulse it hides from the patrons who wander through it, searching for warmth and distraction. In Riften, if you stand by the canal and look closely at the water, you'll occasionally see distorted shapes ripple beneath the wooden docks, reflections bending over edges of geometry that don't exist above the surface, creating the illusion that something unseen swims beneath the city, brushing against the supports without ever revealing itself. There is a small patch of ground near Morthal where the snow never falls properly, leaving an oddly clean circle of cold dirt exposed even during blizzards, as if the sky refuses to lay its frost over that single forgotten spot. In Markarth, one of the Dwemer pipes near the treasury cart emits a faint rhythmic thump every few minutes, too slow to be mechanical, too soft to be deliberate, almost like a distant heartbeat echoing from a buried machine that never stopped running even after its builders vanished thousands of years ago. Near Solitude's docks, a single rope coil sits beside a crate, and if you nudge it just slightly, it unwinds more smoothly than any other rope model in the game, almost like it was given special physics by someone who loved small details more than grand features. In the Karth River, there's a rock lodged at an angle that causes the flowing water to produce a slightly higher-pitched splash sound compared to the rest of the river, a tiny accidental melody the game repeats endlessly without drawing attention to it, offering a secret tune only those who pause long enough ever hear. There's a spot near Winterhold where the wind hums differently, a narrow ledge overlooking the sea where the ambient audio layers produce a resonance that sounds strangely musical, as though the land itself sings mournfully for the city that once stood stronger than it does now. Morning architecture lost to time and storm. The College of Winterhold has a staircase where footsteps echo with a slightly deeper reverb than in the rest of the building, giving the impression that the stone beneath it is hollow, holding secrets in its belly that no student or master ever bothered to explore. In Windhelm, a small cluster of snow piles near the stable has a tiny visual glitch that causes them to shimmer under certain angles of torchlight, giving them the appearance of frost-covered gems buried just beneath the surface, treasures of ice that melt into nothing the moment you try to touch them. The Atronach Forge, deep beneath the college, contains small scorch marks on the floor that don't match the placement of any actual spells used in gameplay, suggesting that whomever used it last performed rituals far more chaotic than the recipes players typically follow. In the forests around Falkreath, Some of the trees have faint claw-like scratches that no creature in Skyrim could realistically have made. Thin diagonal marks that hint at something with smaller, sharper talons moving silently through the branches, far above eye level. There's a tiny island on Lake Ilinalta where a single mushroom grows, always respawning in the exact same place, as if that patch of soil has perfect conditions for life, despite being surrounded by cold, dark water that should make it impossible. One of the bridges near Iverstead has a plank with a slight misalignment, a tiny tilt modeled into the wood that serves no purpose and offers no reward but makes the structure feel hand-built, worn by years of footsteps from travelers who never left their own stories behind. Inside Dragon's Reach, there's a shield hung on the wall behind the Jarl's throne that carries an unusually bright specular highlight, glinting more intensely than any other shield in the hall, like it's been polished far more recently than the rest of the decor, as if someone there still cares for it in secret. A single candle in the Blue Palace balcony area has a flame that flickers slower than every other candle in the game, its subtle movement creating a soft hypnotic effect as though the candle burns through time differently from the rest of the world. In the Reach, the stone walls around certain Forsworn camps contain patterns that resemble faces' weathered expressions, carved accidentally by erosion and texture repetition, creating illusions of ancient spirits watching from the cliffs as you pass through. There is a sound file buried in the game's data for wolves that rarely ever plays in normal gameplay, a soft whining howl that triggers only under extremely specific weather and location conditions, making wolf packs momentarily vulnerable before returning to their usual ferocity. Somewhere in the plains of Whiterun, a single butterfly occasionally spawns with slightly brighter wings than the others, a minor texture variation that gives it a faint gleam when caught under the right sunlight, like nature itself accidentally created a tiny, glowing fragment of beauty to wander aimlessly across the tundra. The stone textures near Snowvale Sanctum hide a faint pattern resembling an hourglass, likely a coincidence in the noise map, but it feels fitting considering the dungeon's connection to forgotten memories and long-buried secrets. The water near the Guardian Stones flows slightly faster than in other areas, despite coming from the same river, a subtle trick of physics that makes the blessing site feel more alive, as if magic itself stirs the current. Standing stones often emit a faint hum that layers beneath the normal ambient soundscape, so soft you'll never hear it unless everything else grows silent, giving them a presence that feels older than the world they rest upon. In the Ratway beneath Riften, certain metal grates emit a hollow ring when struck that doesn't match the expected tone, implying that parts of the underground network are far deeper than the floors suggest, hinting at tunnels sealed long before the Thieves' Guild ever claimed the area. There's a piece of firewood behind a house in Dawnstar that sits perfectly aligned with a nearby crate, as if placed neatly by an NPC that the game never programmed to perform such careful actions, yet it remains tidily set. Every time the cell resets, a bit of environmental order preserved in a world of chaos. In the Pale, during dawn hours, the snowy fog occasionally forms a brief illusion of a distant structure on the horizon, a faint mirage caused by the atmospheric blending that looks almost like a tower or ruin that doesn't actually exist, a ghost of geometry conjured by morning light before fading with the sun. The East Empire Company warehouse hides a single lantern placed on a too-high shelf where no worker could ever reach, a decorative choice that implies someone climbed up there long ago to set it down for reasons the game never explains. One of the boats in Windhelm's harbor produces a barely audible creaking loop that plays slightly off-tempo, making it feel as though the ship rocks on invisible waves only it can feel, drifting in a sea of memories rather than water. When wandering the forests near Darkwater Crossing, There's a tiny stump with a pattern that resembles the silhouette of a dragon when viewed from the right angle, an accidental carving of nature that feels like a tribute to the beasts that shape the world's destiny. The skeletal remains scattered across Skyrim sometimes spawn with their jawbones subtly misaligned, giving them faintly expressive appearances. Some seem to grin, others appear to scream, and a few look as though they died mid-laughter, frozen in emotional poses that make the remains oddly personal. A tiny pebble on a path near Kinesgrove occasionally gets stuck under the physics engine and rolls in a small loop for several seconds, spinning endlessly until friction finally claims it, a quiet reminder that even the most insignificant objects have life for a moment. There's a patch of moss inside Bleak Falls Barrow that glows just slightly brighter than the surrounding vegetation, a tiny luminescent trick of texture blending that makes the dungeon feel just a little more ancient, as if age itself radiates softly from the stones. And inside the forests near Riverwood, a faint sound occasionally plays that resembles flapping wings, but no birds are ever found nearby. It's a leftover ambient sound effect that creates the illusion of wildlife just out of sight, giving the world the impression of being fuller than what the eyes ever see. The world of Skyrim drifts through memory, the way smoke curls from a quiet hearth, and wandering through its frozen fields feels like paging through a dream already half forgotten. In the forests just beyond Riverwood, the pine trees hum with a faint wooden creak at sunrise, a sound created from layered recordings of real pines bending beneath morning frost, meant to give the sense that even the trees are waking with you. At certain angles, shadows in Bleak Falls Barrow stretch a fraction slower than they should, because the ancient Nordic stone carries its own unique shader that mimics the dampness of centuries, making the corridors look as if time moves differently inside. The grass surrounding Whiterun Plains sways in a heartbeat-like rhythm during wind gusts, a hidden animation cycle designed to create the illusion that the entire region breathes with life. The mammoths near Secunda's Kiss sometimes pause and look toward the sky when the moon crosses a specific point above the throat of the world, reminded by their behavior code to acknowledge celestial events, something subtle enough that many wanderers never even notice. The scattered Dwemer ruins adjust their ambient hum based on your proximity, the deeper tones resonating through metal pipes to mimic a mechanical heartbeat, giving each ruin the eerie impression of still being half alive. In the stores of solitude, the cheese wheels stacked on shelves have slightly different weights to simulate imperfect craftsmanship, and sometimes a wheel will roll more quickly off a counter not because of physics alone, but due to tiny variations in their collision values coded individually. The horses of Falkreath occasionally shiver when standing still at night, reacting to invisible cold zones placed there during development to make the region feel colder than others. Even the wind at the top of High Hrothgar has directional layering, blowing differently from hour to hour to subtly remind you of the mountain's shifting moods. In certain inns, the candle flames change shape depending on the number of NPCs in the room, as though the warm light grows more lively the more stories are being shared around it. The waterfalls near Valtheim Towers are mapped with micro ripples that shimmer uniquely at dawn, meant to reflect the first rays of sun spilling over the mountains with gentle accuracy. In the tundra west of Whiterun, sometimes a loose cluster of butterflies drifts near a single purple mountain flower every afternoon. They are scripted to gather around one flower in the region at random, giving the impression that the insect populations of Skyrim wander like tiny nomads. Inside the Hall of the Dead in Markarth, the faintest metallic ring echoes at unpredictable intervals, a leftover from a scrapped mechanic where restless souls would occasionally whisper through the stone. The docks of Riften, produce unique water sounds recorded from real dripping caverns, layered with a soft, hollow resonance to match the swampy timber of the city. Occasionally, when you fire an arrow during a snowstorm in Winterhold, the sound dampens noticeably as the game blends a muted wind profile over ranged weapon audio to mimic snow-absorbing sound. In Blackreach, the glowing fungi pulse in a slow rhythm on a 78-second cycle to give them a lifelike breathing pattern, inspired by deep-sea bioluminescent organisms. If you stand silently in Dragon's Reach after midnight, the Great Hall emits a faint groaning noise, as if settling under its own weight, created by an extremely slow, looping effect meant to mimic ancient timber expanding in the cold. The city guards' helmets each have slightly different rust patterns, a small detail added so that no soldier appears completely uniform, making every guard feel like an individual shaped by their own history. The mines across Skyrim actually track how many ore veins you've depleted, and some miners will mention shortages once you've taken too much, reacting discreetly to the world's economy shifting beneath their feet. The auroras above Winterhold sway differently during nights with clear storms, blending the northern lights with faint cloud movements to give the sky a dreamlike fluidity. The mead barrels in the Bannered Mare hum with a faint wooden resonance that grows deeper as you approach them, a micro-audio detail many players never notice but adds to the warmth of the tavern. Hidden beneath the stones of Iverstead lies an unused vibration zone that was originally meant to simulate tremors from the Greybeard's meditations on the mountain. Though the feature was removed, the invisible zone still causes a faint rumble when crossed at rare moments. When you walk through the marshes of Hjalmarch, dragonflies occasionally land on specific reeds just before taking off again, an interaction coded to add life to the swamp, but subtle enough to feel like coincidence. In Kynesgrove, certain trees shed tiny leaves during cold winds, a small animation cycle meant to mimic brittle foliage crumbling under frost. The Markarth cliffside has an ambient rumble that subtly increases when snow begins to fall, as if the mountains themselves sense approaching weather. Wolves in the Reach sometimes howl not because of player proximity, but because of an invisible lunar cycle determining their pack behavior, adding to the wild, primal energy of the land. The mages of the College of Winterhold carry unique idle animations that cause them to occasionally trace invisible shapes in the air with their fingers, a detail meant to imply constant mental practice of spells, even when not actively casting. The stone bridges across Skyrim resonate differently depending on your armor weight, lightly echoing beneath heavy boots and barely whispering beneath soft shoes, blending immersion with acoustics. Some torches burn slightly shorter when carried through colder regions, their flames shrinking just a little faster to mimic the effect of a harsher climate. In Eastmarch, the steam vents along the volcanic tundra cycle through heat patterns every few minutes, warming the air just enough for local wildlife to congregate around them in invisible clusters. The ravens carved onto ancient Nordic pillars always face east toward the rising sun, symbolizing the cycle of death leading back into dawn, though this symbolism is never mentioned outright. In Dawnstar, the snow on rooftops melts slightly faster on buildings with lit windows, where interior warmth subtly affects the frost shaders outside. Skeever dens contain faint gnawing sounds that continue even if no creatures remain alive, a remnant of ambient audio tied to the location rather than individual enemies. Inside the Ragged Flagon, the tavern lights flicker faintly every few minutes due to an old atmospheric design choice meant to give the Thieves Guild a sense of instability and underground fragility. The Eldergleam tree's leaves produce their own shimmering sound layered beneath normal foliage audio, symbolizing its magical status by giving it a unique presence even in silence. Certain dragon roars contain hidden, reversed audio meant to give them an ethereal, otherworldly resonance that feels ancient and unnatural. Standing stones hum at night with soft tonal frequencies too faint to hear unless the weather is calm. Each stone emits a slightly different pitch to represent its unique blessing. The forge in Whiterun includes tiny sparks coded to leap upward when the heat cycle peaks, flickering like memories rising from old flames. Snow bear pelts in your inventory have slightly more texture data than other pelt items because they were originally used in a cut close-up animation of tanning, but the detail remained. The lanterns of solitude sway slightly faster during windy nights, following a hidden weather variable that subtly alters indoor and outdoor object physics. Throughout the Reach, certain boulders are placed using fractal algorithms to mimic true geological randomness, making the region's rugged beauty feel naturally chaotic. The Shadowgreen Cavern uses an ambient filter that makes distant birds sound slightly distorted, as though filtered through thick moss and overgrown walls, creating a sense of natural isolation. When Khajiit caravans sit by their campfires, their idle animations include faint tail movements responding to wind cycles, a small detail that makes the camps feel vividly alive in nighttime quiet. Even the rain in Falkreath carries a deeper acoustic profile, echoing softly against dense pine needles to create a melancholic, forested hush. And when you wander far from any road, the world sometimes quiets completely for a brief moment, cutting almost all ambient noise. It's a deliberate silence, placed there to make the next breath of wind feel like the land exhaling around you, reminding you that Skyrim lives not only through noise, but through the gentle stillness that settles between every footstep. There's a strange comfort in how Skyrim's world cycles through familiar rhythms, repeating small secrets you've passed 1,000 times, even if you never quite noticed them. Inside the Thieves' Guild, the fires in the Ragged Flagon burn with a slightly different hue than any other torch in the game, casting an almost copper-colored glow over the stone. It isn't magic, just a unique lighting asset, but the effect makes the entire guild feel as if it exists in a pocket outside the rest of Skyrim, a world that dimmed its lights for thieves and cut purses long before the player ever stepped inside. And in Riften's canals outside, if you lean close enough to the water, you'll see faint ripples that move even when the wind is still. The canals hide an invisible current that flows backward against natural direction, as if the underbelly of the city is quietly pulling the world toward it. Up near Dawnstar, the northern slopes carry an ambient wind sound that doesn't play anywhere else. It's a low, hollow whistle that almost resembles breathing, and most wanderers simply interpret it as a cold breeze moving through rocks. But that sound file is named Memory Wind, a leftover from an early build meant for dream sequences. Hearing it in the waking world gives the impression that the region is half asleep, remembering something it was supposed to forget. There's no quest tied to it, no lore explaining it, just a soft exhale drifting down snowy hills each time the weather turns bright and brittle. If you ever stop along the road between Falkreath and Helgen at sunset, the shadows of the pine trees stretch twice as long as they should. For a few minutes during golden hour, an old rendering bug subtly exaggerates their length, making the forest feel older and taller, like giants leaning carefully over the dirt road. Travelers who walk alone through those forests sometimes describe the sensation of being watched, not by wolves or bandits, but by the trees themselves. Skyrim's woods absorb stories just like stone walls do, and when the light reaches just the right angle, the forest seems to stretch forward to greet you with a quiet, patient presence. Inside the Blue Palace, an upper hallway contains a chair positioned beneath a window that casts a perfect square of light onto the carpet. That pattern never changes, no matter the time of day or weather outside. It's a static lighting choice that creates a timeless pocket of brightness, an eternal morning frozen in place. Court mages sometimes walk directly through it without noticing, but something about that still patch of light makes the room feel calm, like an untouched memory holding its position despite centuries of politics and echoes beneath the palace halls. If you visit Morthal at night, when the fog rolls in, the flames of torches flicker with a much slower animation cycle than anywhere else in Skyrim. The fire there almost sways, rocking gently like it's breathing alongside the mist. It lends the town a dreamlike, suspended quality, as if Morthal doesn't fully participate in the rhythm of the rest of the world. The marsh seems to hold time differently, slowing the world's pulse until every step feels like moving through a half-remembered dream. In the tunnels beneath Markarth, Dwemer pipes release steam in intervals that form a repeating beat if you stand still long enough. It loops every 13 seconds, a subtle mechanical rhythm that was originally intended to guide players toward deeper rooms through sound alone. The effect remained even after that feature was abandoned, leaving the ruins with a heartbeat that thumps faintly in the background, reminding you that the ancient city still clings to its patterns, still repeating motions older than any surface dweller alive. Climbing up toward High Hrothgar, the thin air carries a faint chime effect when snowflakes hit certain stones near the summit. The sound is nearly imperceptible, a crystalline tap that echoes for just a moment before vanishing. Those chimes are leftovers from an old test involving magical snow. But when they appear in the final game, they give the impression that the mountain recognizes your presence, brushing its cold fingers across the stones to welcome or warn you. Even the air feels sacred up there, carrying whispers of the Greybeard's long silence. If you move through the College of Winterhold during heavy snowfall, the snow particles vanish and reappear as you pass under archways, but in certain angles, the effect creates the illusion that snow is falling through the floor. It isn't magic, just a strange overlap in particle rendering, but it makes the college seem haunted by the weather itself. Students occasionally comment on phantom cold spots in hallways, but no quest points them out, they just exist, quietly reinforcing the idea that Winterhold lives in the perpetual tension between storm and study. Inside the inn at Windhelm, one of the banners above the fireplace is slightly misaligned compared to the others. It hangs just an inch too low, and though most people never notice it consciously, the detail adds subtle imperfection to the tavern's atmosphere. It makes the space feel lived in, worn in the way real inns are decor shifted by years of people brushing past, objects nudged out of place by life rather than design. The uneven banner becomes a tiny testament to humanity, persisting even in a cold city carved from stone and bitterness. Across Skyrim, birds behave strangely near waterfalls. Hawk flight paths shift just slightly upward whenever they pass the mist around cascades, as if avoiding something invisible in the air. Their avoidance radius is coded to water spray effects, but the result feels almost natural, making the birds seem cautious of places where the air grows too thick with sound and movement. Waterfalls become boundaries in the world, not just walls of rushing water, but places that creatures instinctively recognize as sacred, dangerous, or simply too chaotic for comfort. In the abandoned shack used by the Dark Brotherhood, the lantern on the left side of the room casts shadows that seem to flicker out of sync with the flame. It creates the subtle illusion that something is moving in the darkness, even when the fire is still. This wasn't intentional. The shadows are responding to a hidden light source used for the interrogation scene, but the effect leaves the room feeling haunted by every desperate voice that ever echoed within it. Walk near the border gates of Pale Pass, and you may see snowflakes fall upward for a moment, drifting against gravity before settling back into their proper path. It's caused by overlapping wind volumes, but the effect is mesmerizing. Tiny white sparks, rising like souls, slipping upward into the cold sky. Travelers rarely notice unless they stand still, but once you see it, it lingers in your memory, a small moment of reversed nature that feels like the world holding its breath. There's a small spot near Solitude's docks where footsteps echo twice, creating a soft doubling effect that sounds like someone walking just behind you. It's simply a quirk of the terrain mesh, but the auditory illusion gives the harbor an extra layer of solitude, a sense of unseen company moving in step with you across ancient boards and brine-soaked wood. Inside the Hall of the Dead in Whiterun, one candle refuses to burn down no matter how long you visit. Its flame flickers forever, unaffected by time, by weather, by saves or reloads. The candle sits near the shrine at the back, glowing calmly as if guarding its silent room from darkness. No explanation exists for why that particular flame never dims, but it adds a tiny thread of permanence to a place built to honor impermanence. And beyond all of these small moments, there's the simple truth that every corner of Skyrim holds stories accidental or intentional, broken or beautiful, that linger longer than they should. Whether it's the way fog curls around the edges of Riften's rooftops, or how torches flicker a shade softer inside ancient Nordic barrows, or how snow glows faintly blue beneath the moon in the Reach, the world seems to breathe through its details. Even the smallest imperfections and forgotten quirks become part of Skyrim's memory, drifting through its mountains and forests, like whispers waiting patiently for someone to notice them. There's something soothing about the way Skyrim lets the smallest details breathe, tiny pieces of the world that seem insignificant on their own, but settle into the mind like dust drifting across a sunlit corner. In certain caves, the sound of dripping water follows a subtle rhythm that never quite repeats, a natural pattern created by uneven stone formations. The droplets echo differently depending on where you stand, almost as if the cave remembers every traveler who passed through and adjusts the sound to greet them. If you listen closely enough, the echoes separate into layers, each one ringing out like a soft reminder that even the quietest places in Skyrim have their own heartbeat. Along the roads leading into Whiterun, butterflies occasionally gather in clusters near old stumps and patches of mountain flowers. Their movements form slow spirals that look almost choreographed, though it's simply the work of the engine choosing specific idle animations. But to a wanderer passing by, it feels intentional, as if the land itself set aside moments of stillness to remind you that beauty can survive in places worn thin by war and time. The way their wings flicker in sunlight almost resembles tiny lanterns guiding travelers home. Inside the city walls, the Skyforge emits a glow that seems to cling to the surrounding slopes long after the sun sets. For a brief moment each evening, a faint shimmer lingers above the stone, blending the warmth of the forge with the cold air sweeping down from the mountains. The effect wasn't designed as a magical feature, but it feels magical nonetheless. Many players notice the glow and imagine a soul resting within the metal, like the forge remembers the ancient hands that once shaped history atop that rise. If you stand in the marshes near Morthal during late afternoon, you might catch the fog moving in lazy waves, each pulse rolling like a slow breath across the ground. The fog thickens in pockets where the land dips, almost as though it's gathering its thoughts before drifting forward again. The quiet swirls of mist carry with them the faint sound of frogs and distant wind chimes, gentle touches of a landscape too old and patient to reveal all its secrets at once. Every step through the swamp feels like stepping into someone else's dream, trailing the echoes of lives that vanished centuries ago. In the depths of Dwemer ruins, some gears continue to turn even when no machinery should be functioning. The faint metallic grind often comes from decorative pieces or unused mechanisms left behind during development, but the effect fits so seamlessly that it feels like deliberate storytelling. It gives the impression that the ruins are caught in a loop of forgotten purpose, working tirelessly at tasks that have no meaning in the present. The constant hum weaves itself into every wall and every shadow, like a mechanical memory that refuses to fade. High Hrothgar carries its own subtle details. On particularly clear mornings, snow rolls off the stone steps in tiny cascades, stirred by invisible currents sweeping down from the peak. These small avalanches glisten under early sunlight, creating sparkling waterfalls of frost that disappear almost as soon as they form. Climbers who trek the 7,000 steps often miss these tiny movements, but they give the mountain a living quality, ancient, serene, and quietly observant of anyone who dares to climb its sacred path. In Markarth, the waterfalls that thunder down the cliffside contain an odd detail hidden within their sound design. If you stand in the right place, the roar softens enough to reveal a low, steady pulse beneath it. It sounds almost like a heartbeat, slow and heavy, echoing the vast age of the stone carved into the reach. It might just be an audio layer meant to deepen the ambience, but the effect makes it seem like the entire city rests upon a living mountain, breathing calmly while people go about their day unaware of its steady rhythm. Near the throat of the world, hand-placed wind gusts sometimes trigger only once every few in-game hours, causing a sudden rush of air that feels colder and sharper than the usual mountain breeze. These gusts lift small patches of powdered snow into swirling spirals, creating momentary sculptures that dance in place before dissolving into the air. It almost feels like the sky itself pauses to exhale through narrow cracks in the mountain, reminding you how fragile and fleeting warmth can feel at that altitude. Ice wraiths leave behind a faint, shimmering trail that fades slowly, like evaporating frost. The trail serves no gameplay purpose, but it creates a haunting illusion that they pass through the world only halfway, their bodies gliding between realities. When watched closely, the trail's shape bends around rocks and branches, suggesting that the creatures aren't quite constrained by physical space. They behave like ghosts made of winter, drifting across the landscape with no need for footprints or shadows. If you visit the docks of Windhelm at certain times of day, you might notice that the boats sway more gently when snow begins to fall. The calm rocking isn't weather dependent in the code, but subtle animation loops create the impression that snowfall quiets the water. For a moment, the entire harbor feels hushed, like the sea itself lowers its voice in respect for the cold. The muted atmosphere wraps the docks in a soft, almost muffled stillness that feels more comforting than bleak. Even the smallest creatures hold tiny curiosities. Skeever dens sometimes contain scattered pieces of clutter that seem far too neat, pots stacked in corners, bones arranged in shapes that almost look intentional. The randomness of the loot system occasionally forms these moments where nature and mess align into patterns that feel like primitive organization. It gives the impression that the Skeevers might understand more about their surroundings than simple instinct suggests, gathering objects not for utility, but out of some instinctual sense of order. Inside the forests near Falkreath, fallen trees occasionally lie across sunlight patches in such a way that their shadows ripple with every gust of wind. The effect is subtle but mesmerizing, creating slow waves of darkness that drift over moss and pine needles. It feels like the forest itself is breathing in and out, casting its own form of heartbeat onto the ground. Combined with the gentle rustle of leaves, it creates moments where the forest seems to whisper in soft patterns that only nature understands. The sound of Sabbath drums near Forsworn camps has tiny inconsistencies built into the rhythm, Sometimes a beat arrives a fraction too early or too late, mimicking human imperfection. These offbeat moments make the camps feel alive, as if real musicians are playing from just around the bend. You can almost picture the rebels sitting around their fires, warming their hands while tapping out rhythms that drift through canyons and along mountain paths. Snowberries glow faintly in certain lighting conditions, their surfaces catching reflections that resemble tiny sparks. Though this is simply a graphical quirk, it makes the berries appear enchanted, like remnants of ancient magic preserved in small, harmless fruit. The glow is especially noticeable during late evening when the sun sits low, turning the berries into clusters of firelight hidden in the snow. Dragons landing near farms can startle farm animals in subtle ways. Chickens scatter faster, cows shift uneasily, and even horses take a moment to regain composure. These tiny behavioral patterns aren't tied directly to dragons, but overlap with AI fear responses in a way that feels natural. It creates the impression that every creature in Skyrim recognizes the presence of something greater, reacting instinctively to the shadow of ancient power descending from the sky. In Solitude, the Bard's College contains crates filled with unused instruments, tucked away behind pillars and in storage rooms. These props were meant for cutscenes and scripted performances that never made it into the final version, but they still sit quietly in corners, gathering dust like relics of concerts that never happened. Their presence makes the college feel more lived in, as though students once practiced in busy rooms now silent and forgotten. Even the torches carried by guards flicker slightly differently depending on the wind direction. The flame animation reacts to location-based wind zones, bending softly toward one side. It's a tiny touch, but it creates the illusion that every gust that rolls across the land affects even the smallest flames. Watching those torches bend and shimmer in the night makes the world feel connected, every ember swayed by the breath of the sky. Inside the College of Winterhold, the magical lights floating near the ceiling shift their brightness subtly throughout the day. Though this change has no functional purpose, it gives the college a living presence, as though the magic embedded within its ancient stones ebbs and flows with time. The gentle glow feels like the heartbeat of the institution, pulsing softly above the heads of students practicing spells too subtle or unsafe to cast aloud. And when the auroras stretch across Skyrim's sky, they cast colors that bleed faintly over snowfields, tinting the world in hues of pale green and soft blue. These shimmering lights shift with slow grace, turning even the harshest months into something serene. Standing alone under that endless sky, the land quiet around you, it becomes clear that even in a world worn down by dragons, civil war, and ruin, beauty continues to rise, unbroken, drifting like a dream across the darkest hours of the night. Even in the quiet corners of Skyrim, where the snow lies undisturbed and the wind moves with the softness of a sigh, the world holds details so small they seem almost accidental, pieces of the land shaped by forgotten hands or by the patient passing of ages. On the fields outside Whiterun, the tundra grass leans ever so slightly southwest, a tilt formed from centuries of mountain winds sweeping down from the throat of the world. The grass remembers every storm that has ever touched the plains, each blade bending like a quiet record of weather patterns older than the city itself. When travelers walk through those plains at sunset, the light catches on those blades like gentle sparks, making the land glow as though someone brushed gold leaf across it. The small fishing piers scattered across Skyrim never creak the same way twice. The wood in Riften's docks expands more slowly than the wood in Solitude's colder climate, changing the pitch of each footstep by tiny degrees. If you listen carefully, you can almost tell where you are with your eyes closed, guided only by the way the planks hum beneath your boots. Some claim the docks develop memories of the people who walk them most often, the wood shaping its sound to match the rhythm of their steps, a familiar whisper that greets them every time they return. Far in the reach, dwarven ruins release faint gusts of warm air through cracks in their outer walls. These breezes smell slightly metallic, carrying hints of oil, stone dust, and something faintly sweet, perhaps residue from ancient machines that have not fully gone silent. Sometimes that warm breath drifts into the open, brushing against the cold mountain wind like a brief handshake between civilizations separated by thousands of years. Travelers passing by rarely notice that warmth unless the air is perfectly still. But once felt, it lingers in memory like a momentary reminder that not all quiet places are dead ones. On certain cliffs north of Dawnstar, small clusters of snowberries grow in impossible locations, clinging to jagged rock faces where no soil should be able to hold. Scholars have speculated that these berries grow there only because the cold winds act as nourishment, carrying minerals from distant patches of earth. Others think the berries grow from seeds dropped by migrating hawks, snagged in the birds' feathers as they soared across the sea. Whatever the cause, those cliffside plants glow faintly under moonlight, their red skins reflecting the cold shimmer of the auroras like tiny lanterns burning in the frost. If you wander beneath the great stone bridges of Windhelm, you can sometimes hear echoes of footsteps that don't match your own pace. The sounds are soft, distant, and slightly delayed, bouncing strangely off the ancient Nordic stone. Some believe it's a quirk of the city's acoustics, shaped by the river's constant rush and the cavern-like architecture around it. Others imagine that the sound might belong to the countless generations who walked those paths before, their presence preserved in the stone like the faintest ghost of a memory. The candles in the Blue Palace burn more steadily than candles anywhere else in Skyrim. The hall's high ceilings draw drafts upward instead of outward, creating a gentle upward pull of air that keeps flames tall and still. Court mages sometimes use the palace's candlelight to practice delicate spell work, believing that steady flame sharpens concentration. Servants whisper that the candles never sputter when the Queen Mother passes by, as if the palace itself holds its breath out of respect. There is a book in the College of Winterhold's library with a spine reinforced by dwarven metal, though the pages within are written in the hand of a modern scholar. The metal serves no practical purpose. The scribes simply believed the strength of the Dwemer would protect the fragile parchment inside. When you open the book, the spine makes a soft ringing sound, the faintest chime of metal meeting motion. That little note echoes through the quiet stacks like a reminder that even knowledge requires armor. On the road between Falkreath and Helgen, there is a stump with a pattern carved into its surface, a swirl that resembles a whirlpool, its lines deep enough to collect rainwater. Whenever the water pools there, it reflects the sky in a perfect small circle, mirroring the world above with uncanny clarity. Travelers often stop at this stump without knowing why, drawn to the symmetry of sky and earth meeting in a bowl of weathered wood. Some think it was carved as a meditation point by a solitary monk. Others assume it was the idle handiwork of a bored woodcutter. But whatever its origin, the stump has become a tiny altar to stillness, a reminder that even in wild forests, calm can be carved by human hands. The stones around Whiterun's city well are smoother than the rest of the city's masonry, their surfaces worn down by countless palms and cups raised to collect water. The well has quenched the thirst of soldiers, merchants, nobles, and wanderers alike, its edges polished by generations who paused for a moment of relief. At dawn, those stones glow faintly pink as the rising sun brushes over them, making the well look almost warm enough to touch. In the forests west of Morthal, small groups of butterflies often gather near fallen logs. Their wings move in slow, rhythmic patterns that follow the shape of the moss beneath them, almost as though they are tasting the memory of the tree. The moss there has a faint scent, earthy and slightly sweet, mingling with the smell of damp bark and river mist. Hunters pass by these logs with quiet reverence, believing the butterflies perform some soft ritual of the forest that humans are not meant to understand. The drinking horns found in taverns across Skyrim differ slightly from region to region. In Whiterun, horns are polished with a mixture of snowberry juice and salt, giving them a subtle reddish sheen. In Windhelm, the horns often have small chips along their rims, the result of being passed too quickly between storytellers eager to share tales of battle. In Riften, the horns are wrapped at the base with thin strips of leather dyed in autumn colors, an old tradition meant to bring luck during trade negotiations. No one writes about these differences, yet every tavern holds its own quiet ritual in the objects it uses. The wind at the summit of the throat of the world sometimes carries faint harmonic tones, created when gusts funnel through cracks in the stone. These tones shift with temperature, changing pitch as the air grows warmer or colder. Dragonborn who meditate there occasionally swear they can hear the tones aligning with the rhythm of their breathing, as if the mountain itself listens and responds. The sound is not magic, yet it feels sacred, a natural hymn from the highest place in Skyrim. When it rains in the rift, droplets fall through leaves of golden color, making the forest glow as though lit from within. The rain carries the soft scent of pine, sap, and overripe berries crushed beneath the weight of storms. If you listen closely, you can hear the leaves shifting in the wind like 1,000 small footsteps moving across the canopy. That golden forest has sheltered travelers for centuries, its trees bending gently as though bowing to every passerby. The small alcoves cut into the walls of Nordic temples often contain simple clay bowls filled with dried sprigs of mountain flowers. Priests replace them regularly, not for ritual significance, but for the scent, a mix of lavender, juniper, and crushed leaf that calms the mind during prayer. In the dead of night, torchlight flickers across these bowls, casting soft shadows that sway like petals in a forgotten breeze. There is a stone near the border of Eastmarch, with a groove worn deeply into its surface. It is said that travelers used to sit on the stone to watch for distant dragon sightings, their armor slowly wearing down the rock over decades. Now the groove fits the shape of a seated person almost perfectly, as though the stone remembers every watcher who once perched upon it. When snow falls in solitude, the flakes drift more slowly than anywhere else. The city's high walls block strong winds, creating calm pockets of air where snow moves like drifting feathers, floating rather than falling. Children sometimes chase these flakes through the courtyard of the Blue Palace, trying to catch them before they land. Their laughter echoes softly off stone, blending with the gentle hush of winter settling over the city. Some Nordic barrows have small cracks near their entrances that release faint warmth, remnants of ancient fires burning deep within the earth. That warmth mixes with the cold outside, creating tiny pockets of mist that swirl around the stones like ghosts of old rituals. Travelers walking by often pause without knowing why, sensing something sacred in the mingling of warmth and frost. On the nights when the auroras stretch across the sky in ribbons of green and blue, the snowfields north of Winterhold glow faintly with reflected light. The snow absorbs the colors, bending them gently across its surface, like the brush strokes of a painter working in silence. Wolves sometimes stop mid-stride during those nights, lifting their heads to watch the sky, their eyes reflecting streaks of turquoise and gold. There's a quiet moment on Skyrim's northern coast where the wind seems to lose its direction, hesitating in the space between mountains and sea, as though unsure whether it should carry cold salt spray inland or let the snowflakes fall untouched. Travelers who pass that region sometimes notice the strange hush that follows, a gentle pause in nature's breathing. The silence there is not accidental. It's caused by a quirk in Skyrim's environmental mapping, a place where the wind boundary resets and creates a momentary bubble of stillness. It feels strangely sacred, as if the land itself is holding its breath to see whether the footsteps crossing its frozen shores belong to friend or foe, or simply another wanderer drawn north by curiosity alone. Deep beneath Riften, where the Ratway twists like tangled roots of a dying forest, there is a single torch bracket that has never been extinguished in all the years since the Thieves' Guild fell into decline. It flickers with an intensity no other torch in the tunnels displays, a tiny flame that never seems to waver even when the drafts howl through the wooden planks overhead. Some say the flame is tied to the old days of the guild's prosperity, burning brighter when its influence grows and dimmer when the guild falls into shadow. While it's likely a simple lighting glitch, there's something poetic about a lone flame refusing to die, holding on for the day the guild finally reclaims the glory it lost. In Windhelm, the market stalls creak louder during snowstorms, not because of the cold, but because their wooden beams were originally misaligned during reconstruction after the Great Collapse. The mismatched supports strain against each other in the wind, creating a chorus of groans that many locals mistake for ghosts drifting through the snow-heavy air. It gives the city an air of haunted resilience, as though the stones themselves still mourn the tragedy that reshaped them. Travelers who stay long enough come to find comfort in the eerie rhythm: Windhelm mourning, Windhelm remembering, Windhelm surviving. The pools surrounding the Eldergleam tree hold a faint shimmer easily mistaken for magical residue. In truth, the shimmer comes from thousands of tiny air bubbles rising from cracks in the cavern floor, released by mineral-rich water filtering upward through volcanic stone. The effect looks otherworldly, as though the Eldergleam breathes softly in its sleep, exhaling the memories of ages long past. Pilgrims who witness it often believe they've glimpsed the heartbeat of sacred nature itself, unaware of the perfectly ordinary magic of geology unfolding beneath their feet. Dragon's Reach has a small alcove carved into its lower hall where sound behaves strangely, bouncing off the walls in soft echoes even when no one speaks. This was an accidental acoustic resonance, created when the hall was rebuilt generations ago. But the effect gives visitors the sense that the hall is murmuring to them, repeating their footsteps, whispering their presence back to them as if acknowledging every soul who enters its ancient domain. Children of Whiterun call it the listening corner, believing that if you stand there long enough, the hall will tell you secrets about the dragons once imprisoned within its wooden bones. If you visit the Solitude Catacombs at dawn, a thin beam of sunlight filters through a crack in the stone ceiling and shines directly onto a single burial urn. The builders likely never intended this small miracle of light, yet every morning it happens without fail, illuminating the urn as though honoring its long-forgotten occupant. Some priests of the Hall of the Dead believe this is Arkay's blessing, a quiet gesture toward a spirit who once meant something to someone, even if their name is now lost beneath layers of dust and time. The tundra plains east of Whiterun are filled with patches of grass that sway out of rhythm with the breeze, moving with a gentler, slower motion than the surrounding vegetation. This happens because their animation loops are set at a slightly lower frequency, but for many travelers, it feels as though certain places on the plains are cradled by softer winds, protected from the harsher gusts that lash across the open fields. Stand among these gentle grass patches long enough, and it feels like the land is calming itself around you, holding you in a small pocket of peace that the rest of Skyrim rarely offers. Snowberries glow faintly at night, their bright red skins reflecting any source of light, even the moon. This reflective quality comes from a thin layer of wax that coats the berries, meant to help them survive Skyrim's brutal winters. But to travelers moving through dark forests with only the moon as a guide, the berries appear as tiny embers scattered across the snow, marking safe paths through the undergrowth. Nature becomes a guide, offering flashes of color in a world where frost rules everything it touches. In the forests near Riverwood, certain fallen logs always attract butterflies, even in colder months when butterflies should be scarce. These logs rest on beds of soil warmer than the surrounding forest, heated by underground streams flowing close to the surface. The warmth draws the insects out from hiding, creating small pockets of unexpected life amidst the grasp of winter. Seen from afar, the effect resembles nature gathering around small fires, warming its wings by the earth's hidden heartbeat. Inside the Dwemer ruins of Mzulft, there's a single hallway where the metallic hum of ancient machinery rises and falls in rhythmic pulses. Though this is simply the sound of water moving through pipes behind the walls, it creates the impression that the ruins themselves are breathing a slow, gentle expansion and contraction echoing through the stone. Adventurers often mistake this sound for a living presence, as though the Dwemer machines wait patiently for someone to remember what purpose they once served, humming their messages to whoever listens closely enough. Blackreach holds a peculiar phenomenon where certain mushrooms dim their light when you approach too quickly, as though shy in your presence. This is caused by LOD transitions, but the effect feels almost alive, turning the cavern into a breathing forest of luminescent giants that respond to your movement like sentient flora. Wanderers describe the feeling of being watched, not with malice but with curiosity, as though an ancient underworld observes them gently through the soft glow of its fungal lanterns. The steps leading to High Hrothgar produce different pitches when struck with weapons or spells, each stone resonating uniquely against the mountain's cold air. This happens because the stones were carved from different layers of the mountain, each with varying densities. Some tones are deep and somber, while others echo with bright clarity, forming an accidental musical scale stretching up the mountain. Travelers with a keen ear sometimes pause to strike different steps, creating small melodies that drift into the mist, unheard by anyone except the silent monastery watching over the world. The docks of Dawnstar occasionally produce faint ringing sounds late at night, caused by the icy water contracting and cracking against the wooden beams. The sound is thin and ghostly, like distant bells ringing beneath the sea. Locals tell stories of drowned sailors sending warnings through the frozen water, but the truth is simply the language of winter speaking through wood and ice. Still, the effect lingers in the mind, a reminder that even the calmest harbor can hold echoes of forgotten stories beneath its quiet surface. In Markarth, the sound of water flowing behind the city walls creates an unintentional harmony as it passes through narrow stone channels built during the First Era. As the streams travel downward, the vibrations align into soft chords that resonate through the Dwemer stonework, creating a background melody that changes subtly with the season. The city becomes an instrument played by nature itself, humming with the voice of ancient engineering that refuses to fall silent even after centuries of neglect. The sky above Skyrim contains a hidden star pattern that only appears during heavy auroras. This pattern, resembling a serpentine curve, is formed by a cluster of faint stars obscured by atmospheric haze. When the aurora clears it for a moment, the constellation appears like a whisper of Akatosh coiled across the heavens. Many players never notice it, but the stars themselves hold stories older than any kingdom, flickering softly like forgotten memories, suspended above a world shaped by dragons and mortals alike. Some wolves in the wilderness have territories that overlap with known bandit camps, yet they never attack the bandits unless provoked. This behavior is a consequence of shared AI states, but it creates the illusion of uneasy alliances between beasts and criminals, as though both groups respect one another's space in the harsh hierarchy of Skyrim's wild places. Hunters sometimes claim that wolves and bandits share an understanding. Both struggle to survive, and both choose their battles carefully in the frozen valleys where food is scarce and winter is unkind. The waterfalls throughout Skyrim produce spray that, at certain angles, refracts light into small arcs too faint to be full rainbows. These micro-rainbows last only a moment before fading, but they shimmer like tiny fragments of magic suspended in the mist. Adventurers almost never notice them, yet nature hides these small wonders all across the landscape, brief, delicate signs that beauty still survives even in the coldest corners of the world. Kinnereth shrines emit a faint chiming sound when the wind blows at just the right speed, a soft ringing caused by metal resonating against stone. The sound is accidental, yet priests claim it as proof of the goddess's presence whispering through the air. The tone is gentle, comforting, and fleeting, a moment of peace carried on the breeze, dissolving into silence just as quickly as it appears. And in the depths of Skyrim's dungeons, where torchlight flickers against damp stone, there are places where the walls glisten, not with moisture, but with flecks of silver embedded in the rock. These deposits are remnants of ancient mineral veins, forgotten and unmined, waiting underneath ruins where centuries of conflict have overshadowed their value. Adventurers often overlook the shimmer as mere reflection, unaware that the stones around them hold glimmers of treasure unnoticed by both bandits and kings. There's a strange, gentle magic to Skyrim that reveals itself only when you've spent enough time wandering without any destination in mind, letting the world speak in its own slow language. As you travel across the tundra during those quiet hours, when the sky turns somewhere between silver and lavender, you begin to notice small details that rarely stand out during moments of danger or hurried quests. For instance, the way the torches lining Whiterun stables flicker in irregular patterns, as though responding to the wind in their own dialect. Each torch produces a slightly different hue depending on the type of wood the stable hands used that morning, and because the city's workers rarely stay consistent with their materials, no two evenings in Whiterun ever glow exactly the same way. Some nights feel warmer, other nights cooler, the ambience of the entire city shifting with whatever fire burns outside its gates. Few travelers think to look up during these moments, but when they do, they often notice how even the clouds seem to move differently on torchlit nights, casting shadows that ripple across the plains like soft, drifting waves. The guards who patrol the roads leading up to the city walls sometimes carry mismatched gear, not because of negligence, but because Whiterun's blacksmithing guild intentionally mixes metal types in small proportions. This tradition, dating back to the earliest days of the city, symbolizes unity between the holds, with each guard representing not just their homeland, but the diverse influences shaping Skyrim as a whole. Iron from Eastmarch, corundum from the Reach, steel forged in the Windhelm barracks, these elements blend into equipment that feels subtly different in weight, sound, and temperature depending on the origin of its ingredients. This is why some guards' footsteps ring lightly against the stone, while others echo deeply like distant thunder rolling across a valley. To the trained ear, a patrol's composition can be recognized simply by listening. Occasionally, when standing near the Gildergreen at dawn, travelers hear a faint whispering carried on the wind. It isn't magic, and it isn't the tree speaking, though many believe it to be. The sound is produced by tiny insects hidden deep within the wood, whose wings vibrate during the colder hours, creating tones that resemble soft murmurs. The monks at the Temple of Kinnereth have learned to interpret these vibrations as signs of seasonal shifts. When the insects grow more active during the winter months, It signals an approaching thaw. When they fall silent in early autumn, it warns of a harsher winter to come. Some of the city's oldest residents claim this phenomenon has saved Whiterun from countless crop failures. In the markets, the stone beneath the stands is slightly smoother than the rest of the city's pathways, not because of heavy use, but because the merchants polish their flooring every morning with oils imported from the northern coast. These oils contain minerals that interact with the stone in subtle ways, creating a surface that feels almost like river-worn rock. When the sun hits these stones in late afternoon, they shimmer faintly, as if the marketplace holds a quiet enchantment. Ultimately, this shimmering effect has nothing to do with magic. It is simply the memory of a city caring for itself through small, thoughtful rituals. Out on the plains, mammoths sometimes wander closer to Whiterun than expected. Their presence causes slight vibrations that travel through the ground and echo off the city's stone foundation. These vibrations shift objects inside homes in barely perceptible ways, nudging tankards, rattling loose nails, or causing hanging herbs to sway gently. Many Whiterun residents have grown accustomed to this, considering it part of the city's charm. Children even use the tremors as an excuse to claim mischief wasn't their fault, insisting that a mammoth's footsteps are responsible for knocked over items or spilled ink. Inside Jorvesker, the longhouse of the companions, the walls occasionally release faint scents of smoke and roasted meat, even when no fire burns. This is because the wooden structure has absorbed centuries of feasts and celebrations, storing fragments of aroma within the grain. When the temperature shifts, or when sunlight warms the beams at certain angles, the old scents rise from the wood like ghosts of long-forgotten revelries. Many companions, growing old within those walls, claim they can identify specific feasts based on the aroma that drifts through the hall, recalling stories that weave together memory and myth in a way only warriors who have lived long lives can appreciate. Travelers resting in the plains at night sometimes notice a faint red glow flickering across the northern cliffs. These lights are not magical nor dangerous. They are reflections created by a rare mineral embedded in the rocks. When the moons rise at the correct angle, their light passes through the mineral deposits, producing a shimmering red sheen that dances across the cliffs like embers drifting through air. According to local legend, the lights represent the spirits of ancient Nords guiding travelers, though in truth the effect is simply a natural wonder that many never witness. The farms surrounding Whiterun have their own secrets too. The soil beneath the tundra is layered with ancient ash from long-extinct volcanic eruptions, providing nutrients that give Whiterun's crops a richer taste than produce grown elsewhere. Carrots harvested here have a slight sweetness that innkeepers in Riverwood envy. Wheat from these fields grinds into flour that produces softer, fluffier bread. Even the honey produced by local bees carries subtle notes of tundra flowers that only bloom for a few short weeks each year. These varieties of flowers hide low beneath the grass, unseen by most, but their pollen weaves into the honey in a way that gives Whiterun's mead a flavor found nowhere else in Skyrim. The wind itself behaves differently on the plains, moving in circular patterns that confound outsiders. These swirling breezes are caused by the unique shape of the valley, which funnels air between the mountains and rolls it across open fields. The effect produces gentle spirals of dust that rise briefly before falling to earth again, creating a soft visual rhythm that many travelers find soothing. Some claim that if you stand still long enough in the middle of the plains, the wind will eventually wrap around you like an invisible cloak, making the world feel warmer and more intimate. Whether or not this is true, there's no denying that the plains possess a calming presence that drifts into the dreams of those who rest there. When rain falls over Whiterun, the droplets create different pitches depending on where they land. The rooftops of the city produce a deep tapping rhythm, while stone pathways ring with sharper tones. The soft earth near farms creates a dull thud, and puddles produce gentle splashes that seem to harmonize with one another. Some residents claim to identify the strength of a storm by listening to the melodies created across the city. Old farmers can even tell which direction the storm is moving by the tone of the raindrops hitting their windows. Occasionally, when a strong gust of wind sweeps across Dragon's Reach at night, it passes through narrow gaps in the wooden rafters and produces a long, low whistle. This sound has startled many first-time visitors, but long-term residents know it well. They call it the Dragon's Sigh, believing it to be a sign that the ancient palace remembers its past and honors the spirits of long-dead dragons. Children in Whiterun often fall asleep listening to this deep, resonant sound during storms, imagining that they are protected by invisible guardians watching from the sky. The mead barrels stored beneath the bannered mare contain tiny amounts of sap from the original Gildergreen, added during a tradition that dates back centuries. This sap gives the mead a warm undertone, almost like a soft floral sweetness that lingers on the tongue. The innkeeper adds only a small drop to each barrel, claiming that too much would overpower the taste. Travelers who rest in the inn often claim to have the best night's sleep of their journey after drinking a cup of this special brew. Locals attribute this not to any magical property, but to the atmosphere of community that fills the inn every night. Stories shared, laughter echoing through the rafters, and music drifting from the lute player's corner. The city's outer walls contain hidden carvings from craftsmen who built Whiterun during its earliest years. These carvings hide beneath layers of weathering and moss, but on clear mornings, when sunlight hits the stone directly, faint outlines can be seen, symbols representing the families who helped construct the city. Many believe these carvings are ancient runes, but scholars have determined they are simple marks of pride left by the builders. Knowing their work would stand for generations, they etched their names and symbols into the stone so their memory would outlast them. The Skyforge emits a soft, almost musical hum at dawn. This sound is produced not by magic, but by the way heat trapped in the metal overnight rises rapidly when touched by morning sunlight. The forge whispers for only a few moments each day, creating a tone that blends with the sounds of birds awakening across the city. Some companions claim the hum was louder during their youth, though this is likely nostalgia speaking, as the forge's construction hasn't changed in centuries. And late at night, when the moons rise high above the plains and the world grows still, the quiet becomes its own kind of presence. On these nights, the faint rustling of grass, the soft crackling of distant torches, and the low hum of the wind create a sound that feels almost like breathing. The city seems alive, dreaming alongside those who slumber within its walls. Whiterun becomes not just a place, but a feeling, a warm memory wrapped in moonlight and gentle wind. And as travelers drift into sleep within inns, camps, and homes across the region, the world around them settles too, resting just enough to whisper new secrets when dawn comes again. The nights in Skyrim carry a different kind of silence, one that feels as though it's been settling over the land for thousands of years. When you walk through the tundra near Whiterun after midnight, the stars shimmer in such a dense cluster that the sky almost looks carved rather than painted, and the faintest breeze creates a quiet ringing around the skeletal remains of mammoths scattered across the plains. If you follow that wind long enough, you'll sometimes hear a soft trembling in the grass, not from creatures hiding nearby, but from ancient stones slowly cooling under the moonlight. The land contracts and expands in tiny shifts you'll never notice unless you're standing perfectly still, letting the world breathe around you as if you've drifted into a dream someone else had long before you arrived. There's a strange comfort in knowing that the waterfalls throughout Skyrim never truly sound the same twice. Their roars are shaped by the changing air temperature, the shifting of moss on the stone, and even the moisture in the mist drifting from their spray. If you listen at dawn, when the world is still rubbing sleep from its eyes, the falls carry a softer tone, almost like a whisper trying to wake itself. By afternoon, the waters thunder with enough strength to echo through entire valleys, and by nightfall, that power mellows again into a steady hum that blankets the wilds like a lullaby. Travelers passing through these quiet hours often swear that the sound of rushing water feels warm somehow, like the world is wrapping them in a blanket woven from the memory of seasons long gone. If you ever stand near the burial mounds of the ancient Nords, you may notice something odd about the air. It doesn't move the same way as the rest of Skyrim. Instead, it hangs heavier, like mist made from old memories that never had the chance to fade properly. Some say the ground here holds on to warmth even in the coldest months, a lingering trace of rituals once performed under torchlight when the sky was darker and the stones were younger. The silence in these places feels weightier than ordinary quiet, filled with an unspoken awareness that countless stories rest beneath your feet, some proud, some forgotten, and some still waiting for a voice willing to tell them. The lanterns in Solitude, when viewed from the lower docks, glow with a hue slightly different from the ones used in the rest of Skyrim. They flicker with a faint gold tint that seems too warm for a city perched above such cold seas. The shimmering effect comes from a rare type of whale oil harvested from deep northern waters, oil that burns slower and steadier than anything sold in markets. These lanterns were originally intended to guide sailors returning home during blizzards, helping them find their way to the archway beneath the massive arch of the Great Arch Bridge. Even though most sailors navigate by other means now, the lanterns remain, their soft light drifting across the water like a promise of safety passed down from one generation of seafarers to the next. If you take your time exploring the forests near Falkreath, you might notice that the shadows behave strangely around midday. They stretch longer than they should, bending around tree trunks in a way that almost looks intentional. This effect comes from the thickness of the canopy above, where branches weave together so tightly that sunlight doesn't fall straight, it filters through in scattered shards, creating moving, rippling shapes that crawl across the forest floor. Some hunters claim these shifting shadows help animals hide, making them nearly invisible unless they choose to step fully into the light. Others believe the forest itself creates this pattern to protect the silence that lives there, a silence that feels older than any city or kingdom. The blacksmiths of Skyrim all carry tiny pieces of coal tucked somewhere on their person, usually hidden in a pouch or tied to a string around the wrist. They do this not for superstition, but because coal dust helps them gauge the temperature of metal more accurately when forging under unpredictable weather conditions. When the dust melts too quickly on the surface of a heated blade, they know to ease the flame. When it lingers, they feed the forge more air. It's a quiet, simple trick passed between smiths like an unspoken handshake, one that connects them across cities and holds in common the shared heartbeat of iron and fire. Up in Winterhold, if you walk outside the college during snowfall, you may hear small clicking sounds beneath your boots. These are not ice cracks or frozen soil shifting, they're bits of shattered enchantments lingering from failed student spells. When magic backfires or dissipates unexpectedly, fragments of its energy crystallize into brittle, glass-like particles that eventually scatter across the courtyard. You can't see them unless the moon hits just right, but when they break under your step, they make that peculiar sound, like tiny bells crushed beneath snow. It's a strange reminder that even accidents at the college leave their mark on the world, each one a tiny echo of someone learning to shape forces far older than themselves. If you wander the roads at dusk, especially along the winding paths between Kinesgrove and Darkwater Crossing, you might see faint blue motes drift across the air. They're not insects or embers, but remnants of ancient spells cast during the Dragon War. These drifting lights form only when the wind is perfectly calm and dusk settles without clouds. They rise from the earth like memories refusing to fade, tiny specks of magic that once carved the fate of an entire continent. Most travelers never notice them, brushing past without a second glance, but those who pause long enough can see how the motes swirl gently toward the sky before dissolving into the evening. Near the base of the throat of the world, hidden in quiet crevices between slabs of ancient stone, layers of lichen grow that do not exist anywhere else in Tamriel. These tiny plants shimmer faintly in moonlight, a soft silver sparkle caused by a natural frost-binding property that helps them survive impossible cold. Scholars at the college have collected samples for decades, fascinated by how these organisms cling so fiercely to life in a place where almost everything else freezes. Some believe these lichens are touched by Kine herself, created during the world's first storms as a symbol of endurance through endless winter. And deep within the mountain passes between Markarth and Whiterun, voices sometimes echo oddly, not repeating your words but altering them slightly, giving them softer tones or stretching them into gentle, lingering murmurs. This acoustic distortion comes from the shape of the stone walls, which bend sound in ways no builder ever intended. But travelers often claim the echoes feel almost intentional, like whispers from the mountains themselves. Whether it's imagination or geology doesn't matter. Hearing your voice return to you, sounding tired, peaceful, or distant, makes the world feel vast and conscious, as though the land is acknowledging your presence in its quiet, ancient way. Late at night in Skyrim, when the wind grows slower than breath and the mountains turn into quiet silhouettes against the sky, the world begins to show its smallest secrets. Even the rivers behave differently after midnight. The current softens slightly, and the surface reflections dim, as though the water knows the world is trying to fall asleep and adjusts itself to match that gentle mood. The faint ripples stretching along the banks of places like Riverwood and Iverstead aren't random. They're tied to an invisible weather cycle that changes subtly after certain in-game hours. The land moves with you and around you, always listening in its own quiet way. If you ever camp near the tree line above Riften, the night air carries the smell of juniper in a way no other region does. The subtle blue haze floating above the branches isn't fog. It's a unique ambient effect used only in that corner of the rift. It creates an atmosphere that feels like a memory, like walking through a dream you've almost forgotten. Travelers often say they feel calmer the deeper they move into the rift, as though the forest knows how much noise the world already holds and chooses to fade softly around you. The Whiterun Plains are known for their wide skies, but few players notice the tiny insects that drift near the tall grass. They glow faintly in the early evening, little dots of gold that flicker for mere seconds before vanishing again. They were added early in development to mimic summer fireflies, then quietly left behind even though their behavior never became a full feature. That brief, soft sparkle turning the tundra gold for a heartbeat feels like Skyrim exhaling warmth before the cold returns. Travelers who spend time near the bridges in the Reach sometimes hear faint metallic echoes beneath the stone. It's not the wind, it's a leftover Dwemer ambient channel, deep and low, still humming under the mountains like the remnants of a sleeping machine. The stone bridges just happen to sit above the perfect fault line in the audio layer, turning the natural echoes into something that feels artificial, ghostly, or ancient. It gives the Reach its uneasy beauty, the sense that the land has bones that still remember the machines that once walked there. Inside small Nordic barrows, places like Embershard and Bleak Falls, there are tiny carvings most players never see. They sit near the floorboards, hidden behind crates or tucked beneath stone shelves, depicting little spirals and swirls meant to represent breaths of the wind. Ancient Nords believed the wind carried memories, so craftsmen would mark their halls with these swirls to keep the voices of their ancestors from drifting too far away. Skyrim fills even its forgotten corners with small gestures, always hinting that its people feared losing the sound of home more than anything else. The snow near Winterhold glitters differently from the snow in the Pale. Up close, the flakes reflect blue instead of white, adjusted intentionally in the region's shaders to mimic the effect of ice catching sea light. That glint makes the frozen coast feel colder, sharper, lonelier. Standing there at night, with the college looming overhead and the waves crashing quietly below, the landscape feels like an old whisper, icy, beautiful, and filled with knowledge too heavy to speak aloud. If you watch sabercats long enough, you'll notice they tilt their heads slightly before attacking, a tiny gesture as if listening to something in the grass. The animation was originally part of a larger plan for advanced animal behavior, but only the tilt survived. It gives them an eerie intelligence, a moment of quiet decision before sudden motion. Many players remember this moment because it makes the animals feel aware, not just hostile creatures who think with their bodies. The banners hanging across Skyrim's cities sway at different rhythms depending on the hold. Whiterun's banners move freely, catching every breeze, while Windhelm's barely shift at all, stiff with frost and deliberate weight. Markarth uses heavier material, causing the flags to ripple more slowly, like old war memories dragging themselves through stone air. The small differences create invisible personality, turning each hold into a character with its own breath and posture. A small pond near Falkreath contains lilies that never fully bloom. They remain in a half-open state, even under bright sunlight. This wasn't intentional, it's a small oversight in animation triggers, but it accidentally created one of the calmest, gentlest details in the entire game. The half-closed lilies give the water a feeling of perpetual dawn, a moment of quiet that never transitions into day. It's like the pond is holding on to the hour before sunrise because it prefers that stillness. Sometimes, when you enter taverns after midnight, the fireplaces burn lower than usual. Their flames shrink slightly, casting longer shadows on the wooden floors. The flickering dimness isn't a glitch, it's tied to NPC idle cycles. When fewer people are awake, the tavern's ambient fires take on softer tones to match the sleeping energy of the building. Inns in Skyrim don't just house rest, they imitate it, surrounding you in warmth that feels like the world trying to tuck itself in. If you stand near a smelter and wait long enough, the sparks drifting into the air form patterns that resemble constellations. They aren't truly constellations, of course, but the particle system was built using random loops derived from star patterns stored in the game's astronomical map. A detail so tiny, most never notice it, yet it creates a sense of connection, sparks rising from stone and fire, echoing the same symbols written far above the world. Cicadas hum on warm evenings in the southern holds, though most players never hear them clearly because the sound mixes softly with wind layers. The insects were added to make the warmer regions feel alive, buzzing with subtle, natural sound. They're quiet enough that you only hear them when you're standing still, Skyrim rewarding moments of stillness by letting you hear what the land says when no one is rushing through it. Near the upper ledges of the throat of the world, your breath fogs more heavily even if the air looks clear. This effect isn't tied to temperature, it's tied to altitude, as though the world wants every traveler who climbs that far to feel how thin the sky becomes. The breath clouds grow slower, larger, and more dramatic at the top, reminding you that you're approaching a sacred boundary. Even the air seems to bow toward the peak. Inside Dragon's Reach, the fire crackles at a slightly different pitch from other hearths. It's tuned to match the hall's acoustics, making the flames sound deeper, richer, more ancient. The fire in the Great Hall has a voice that echoes the building's age, blending with the soft rise of distant music to create warmth that feels ceremonial. The hall is built like a memory of greatness, and its fire speaks accordingly. When you pick plants during rainy weather, the pluck sound becomes subtly muffled, as though water softens the texture of the leaves. It's a tiny detail, barely noticeable, but it exists across the entire world. Herbs sound different when wet. The land reacts to weather not only in visuals but in touch and tone, giving the illusion that everything in Skyrim feels the sky changing above it. Standing near a waterfall creates a faint, shimmering effect on the edges of your vision, tiny distortions mimicking mist. These distortions come from an early design meant to blur the screen slightly, giving waterfalls a sense of weight. Most of the blur was removed, but the shimmer remains. It makes waterfalls feel powerful even when the world is silent around them, offering motion and life in places that might otherwise feel still. Some of the children in Skyrim hum songs that no bard ever performs. Their tunes match very old Nordic lullabies, originally composed for a cut questline involving ancient family traditions. The lullabies survived even when the story didn't, woven quietly into children's idle animations. They sing the past without knowing it, keeping forgotten melodies alive as naturally as breathing. In Dwemer Ruins, quiet metallic ticks occasionally echo through the halls. These ticks come from dormant machinery loops that check for nearby automatons, even when none are present. The ruins pulse with muted life, monitoring corridors that haven't seen true motion in ages. It creates the sense that the Dwemer halls still listen, still wait, still calculate in silence. Ruins that are never fully dead. Even in Markarth, where stone covers every corner, birds occasionally perch near the outer walls and sing soft, single-note calls. These notes aren't part of the regular bird song. They're added as isolated echo channels that bounce around the cliffs. It gives Markarth's exterior a lonely, haunting musicality, like the mountains themselves trying to hum back at the world. And when you rest in the open at night, far from all holds and roads, Skyrim's night sky sometimes brightens just a touch more than usual. The constellation layer glows slightly warmer, responding to your location in the tundra. The sky becomes gentler, more protective, as though the stars try to offer comfort to anyone sleeping under them. In that quiet moment, the world feels like a companion, ancient, watchful, and filled with stories it still hasn't told. Even in its quietest corners, Skyrim finds ways to breathe, to stretch itself into small moments that linger long after the player has moved on. On distant cliffs overlooking the Sea of Ghosts, the wind sometimes shifts in patterns that seem almost deliberate, carrying small eddies of snow that twist into spirals before fading. Some believe these spirals are caused by invisible heat pockets rising from dormant volcanic cracks, but others swear they resemble old Nordic symbols, brief strokes of white air painting shapes too ancient to translate. If you stand still long enough, the spirals form near the edges of your vision, like the mountains whispering forgotten fragments of a language meant only for the wind. There's a peculiar detail tucked inside Blackreach, where nearly every glowing mushroom seems to emit light of subtly different hues. The shades range from cold blues to soft greens to pale purples, and when the mushrooms are grouped closely together, their glow blends like a natural gradient. Most players never notice that groups of similar shades tend to form paths, quiet trails of color, gently steering wanderers toward Dwemer structures or hidden caverns. It's as if the ancient dwarves coaxed the fungus into guiding travelers long after their disappearance, weaving light through darkness the way others might lay down lanterns on a long and lonely road. On rainy days in Skyrim, the reflections in puddles sometimes shimmer more brightly than they should. These reflections actually contain fragments of the skybox, which includes static images of constellations even during daylight. When rain hits the ground, the droplets distort these reflections in tiny movements, creating the subtle illusion that stars are briefly flickering beneath your feet. It's a quiet reminder that in Skyrim, the heavens don't simply belong overhead, they follow you softly, tucked into every surface that catches the faintest glimmer of light. Inside Jorrvaskr, the central table is marked by tiny nicks, dents, and knife cuts that never appear in cutscenes or dialogue. Some of these marks form curved lines where wooden mugs slid across the surface. Others show sharper patterns where blades must have carved too deeply during sparring matches. The table tells its own silent story, the weight of centuries of feasts, arguments, celebrations, apologies, and toasts. Even without the companions present, the wood seems alive with echoes of their laughter and their quarrels, as if the hall itself remembers every voice that ever filled it. In the marshes of Hjalmarch, torchbugs sometimes flicker out of existence for a moment before returning, blinking like lights caught between realities. It isn't a glitch, it's a quirk of their spawn behavior. The game recalculates their position when they intersect with patches of fog, causing them to vanish for a split second before reappearing a few feet away. But the effect gives them an ethereal quality, as if they're creatures that slip between layers of the world, glowing secrets drifting between reeds and cold water. The stables outside Solitude contain a hay pile with a slightly different texture mapping than any other in the hold. The weave pattern appears to repeat every few inches, and if you study it closely, you'll see that one tuft of hay has a subtly drawn rune carved into the wood beneath it. It's hidden by layers of straw, only visible from a slanted angle at sundown. Whether it's an artist's signature, a developer's inside joke, or a forgotten Nordic blessing, no one truly knows, but the stable floor holds a mark that whispers quietly to anyone patient enough to notice. When wandering through Eastmarch at night, you might catch glimpses of the volcanic steam rising in slow, steady breaths. If you watch the steam long enough, it syncs with the ambient wind patterns in a rhythm that feels almost like a heartbeat. The land itself seems to pulse with life, like a sleeping giant stirring beneath layers of stone. The soft hiss of steam becomes a lullaby in the darkness, a warm exhale from the earth below. At certain waterfalls, the spray casts small rainbows that last only a moment. These tiny arcs of color form when sunbeams hit droplets at just the right angle, but some waterfalls, especially those near the rift, create stronger glimmers that almost look like floating shards of crystal. Players sometimes walk through them without noticing, but if you pause in the mist, the air around you fills with shifting colors, like being wrapped in a soft prism woven from water and light. The saber cats of Skyrim have a strange habit of circling prey before striking. While this behavior can be chalked up to AI, it creates a moment of eerie stillness where predator and prey become dancers in a grim ritual. The saber cat stalks in a slow, careful arc, as though honoring an ancient instinct. Their teeth glint with the faintest touch of frost, catching moonlight the way icicles might catch dawn. Even in their ferocity, there's a quiet grace to the way they move. The mines throughout Skyrim contain small clusters of stones that sparkle faintly even when not associated with ore veins. These stones were hand-placed by developers to mimic real-world mica, a mineral that reflects light in shimmering flecks. In dim torchlight, these flecks glint like tiny stars buried deep underground. It gives the impression that the earth is studded with constellations, hidden beneath layers of rock and waiting for some curious miner to stumble upon them. Riften's canals carry water that seems darker and richer than any other in Skyrim. If you stand on the wooden planks and peer into the depths, the reflections dance with unusual clarity, as though the water remembers every lantern that ever touched its surface. There's a soft hum in the air there, created by a layered ambient track that uses low-frequency tones to evoke a feeling of drowsy warmth. It's almost impossible to stand in Riften during a quiet evening and not feel a gentle tug toward the cozy glow of its taverns. The snow in Winterhold behaves differently when footsteps press into it. The sound effect is slightly lower and heavier there, owing to a unique audio file that emphasizes crunch and depth. Winterhold's snow feels older, colder than the snow in the Pale or the Reach. Each footstep carries a soft, echo-like crunch, as if every grain of frost has hardened through centuries of relentless storms. The silence around it wraps the sound like thick wool, creating footsteps that feel almost sacred. In certain Dwemer ruins, the gears hidden behind walls spin slowly, with faint metallic ticks marking each step. These sounds blend into the background so seamlessly that many players go entire playthroughs without noticing them. But Dwemer ruins hum like the stomach of a sleeping titan, each gear turning as if powered by the last breath of a vanished civilization. If you close your eyes and listen, the soft mechanical murmurs feel strangely comforting, like being tucked inside the thoughts of a forgotten world. Night skies in the Rift shimmer in shades warmer than the rest of Skyrim. The auroras there contain a deeper gradient of gold and crimson, hinting at the Hold's closeness to hidden ley lines that run beneath the continent. These warm colors contrast against the cold mountains, making the night feel alive with magic. The stars there twinkle like quiet embers drifting from unseen fires, giving even the calmest nights the sense of a world preparing to dream. The giants' camps are scattered with paintings etched shallowly into stone stick-figure depictions of mammoths, giants, and symbols that resemble swirling suns. These markings are mostly unnoticed, blending into the texture of rocks, but they tell stories in the primitive language of simple lines. They show migrations, storms, hunts, and quiet moments beneath open skies. Giants communicate not through words, but through timeless drawings carved into the bones of the earth. In the forests of Falkreath, mushrooms grow in patterns that resemble constellations. Each cluster mirrors a star formation visible in Skyrim's night sky. Whether this was intentional design or a quiet coincidence, players wandering through the moss-covered woods might pass over an arrangement of fungi that looks strangely familiar, like a fallen piece of the cosmos resting gently on the forest floor. Even the carriages at Skyrim's city gates carry subtle details, faint grooves worn into their wooden seats where countless travelers once rested. These grooves map out stories of journeys never told, of people who rode along bumpy roads and watched mountains rise and fall in the distance. The carriages don't just take you from place to place, they carry echoes of everyone who ever trusted their wheels. On rare nights in Whiterun, the wind chimes near the Gilder Green produce a soft, haunting melody that differs slightly from their usual sound. It happens when the breeze passes through the branches at just the right angle, creating harmonics that ring like a distant lullaby. The melody drifts across the city, carried by the warm air, weaving among rooftops like a tender memory. Most never hear it, but those who do find themselves strangely comforted. Some ruins in the Reach contain patches of moss that glow faintly in darkness. These patches serve no gameplay purpose, but they illuminate forgotten walls and corridors with a pale, eerie sheen. The moss catches on the smallest bits of light, pulling it into soft green radiance, like remnants of ancient spells sleeping in silence. These glows fade when touched, as though shy of human warmth. In snowstorms near Dawnstar, flakes sometimes gather in swirling pockets that move against the wind. These patterns form when gusts bounce off jagged cliffs, trapping snow in small eddies. To a wandering traveler, the swirling pockets seem almost playful snowflakes dancing freely in defiance of the storm's direction. The sight creates a moment of fragile beauty, a tiny rebellion within the heart of winter. If you approach a word wall at dusk, the engraved runes catch the fading sunlight and shimmer with a golden hue. The effect lasts only a minute or two as day becomes night, but in that fleeting light, the words appear to glow with recognition. The stone seems to pulse softly, like a heartbeat under your fingertips, reminding you that the voice is not merely learned, it is remembered. In the silence of Skyrim's deepest forests, distant waterfalls sometimes echo louder than usual, bouncing sound through narrow valleys in unusual ways. The mountains amplify the roar until it sounds like a sleeping dragon somewhere far off. These echoes convince some travelers that dragons rest in hidden caves, breathing deeply as they dream of old battles. But in truth, it's only water reshaping itself into myth through sound. Some Khajiit caravans hum softly while walking long distances at night. Their songs aren't lyrics, just low, steady tones that keep rhythm with their footsteps. These hums blend into the wind and the rustle of grass, creating a traveling lullaby that feels almost magical. The roads feel less lonely when their voices drift across the dark like warm embers. Under certain conditions, the shadows cast by campfires flicker in ways that resemble runic shapes. These brief silhouettes dance across tents and tree trunks, lingering only long enough to tease the imagination. Whether these shapes are tricks of the light or something older stirring quietly in the flame, no one can truly say. And when night falls completely, when torches dim, snow quiets, and wind settles, the world of Skyrim rests in a peace so deep it feels like the whole province is dreaming. Mountains breathe softly in the distance, forests murmur with faint rustling, and rivers glide under starlit skies. Even the creatures retreat into the gentle cradle of darkness, letting the land exhale slowly. Skyrim becomes still, serene, timeless, a quiet kingdom wrapped in stars, waiting for dawn to rise again.